The emergency room went quiet in the wrong way, not calm, alert, the kind of silence that arrives just before something breaks. Monitors continued their steady rhythm. A child coughed behind a curtain. Somewhere down the corridor, a gurney wheel squeaked and stopped. The nurse at triage did not look up. She adjusted a blood pressure cuff, calm, precise, invisible. No one noticed how her eyes tracked the exits. No one noticed her hand pause for half a second on the counter. Then the hospital doors slid open. Not patients, not paramedics. Men in dark jackets stepped inside, scanning controlled federal posture. One of them spoke quietly to the charge desk. "We're looking for your tactical medic." The nurse kept her eyes on the patient. The room did not yet understand what it had ignored. The night shift, the emergency department after midnight, operated on muscle memory. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and warmed plastic. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms, never syncing, never stopping. The waiting room had thinned to a handful of figures slouched in plastic chairs, the insomniacs, the unlucky, the quietly scared. She stood at triage, posture neutral, shoulders relaxed. Her badge identified her simply as ER nurse. No senior pins, no distinguishing marks, just a name few people used because few people needed to. She worked steadily, efficiently, without urgency. Blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, quick questions delivered in a calm, even tone. She did not rush patients and she did not linger. Each interaction ended with a small adjustment, moving a chair slightly to keep a corridor clear, asking one patient to wait closer to the wall, guiding another to sit beneath a camera that staff rarely thought about. None of it drew attention. A resident passed behind her, flipping through digital charts, already irritated by the night. He brushed past without apology. She shifted half a step to keep the aisle clear, eyes never leaving the patient in front of her. Across the room, a television murmured softly. The volume was too low to follow. No one bothered to turn it off. She noticed the security guard near the entrance lean his weight onto one foot, not fatigue, habit. She noted which hand rested closer to his radio. She did not look at him long enough for it to register as observation. A trauma bay door opened briefly. Laughter drifted out, too loud, too sharp. It faded as quickly as it appeared. She marked the time without checking a clock. When a middle-aged man complained of chest tightness, she asked one extra question the intake form did not require. When a teenager arrived with a sprained wrist, she checked his pupils anyway. When an elderly woman's hands trembled while signing paperwork, she adjusted the lighting and handed her a pen with better grip. Small things, invisible things. A charge nurse glanced over once, then looked away. The triage area was under control. That was all that mattered. The nurse's gaze drifted briefly to the main entrance. Automatic doors, clear glass, reflections layered over reflections. She watched how people entered, speed, posture, eye movement. She dismissed most within a second. A pair of paramedics arrived with a non-critical transport. Their report was routine, but their voices were slightly too measured. She caught it, filed it, asked nothing. She logged vitals, updated the board, wiped down the counter with slow, deliberate strokes. Her movements conserved energy, no wasted steps, no sharp turns. Anyone watching closely might have noticed how rarely she turned her back fully to the room, but no one was watching closely. A doctor approached, irritation already on his face. "Why is bed 12 still here?" she answered without looking up. "Labs pending, troponin delayed." He exhaled through his nose and walked away. He did not question how she knew without checking the system. The overhead lights flickered once, barely perceptible. She paused her hand for half a second, then continued typing. The pause was not conscious, it was trained. She adjusted a rolling stool that had drifted slightly into a walkway, nudged a supply cart closer to the wall, repositioned a wheelchair so it would not block a straight path to the trauma bays. The ER breathed around her, chaos held in place by routine. At 12:47 a.m., the security desk received a call. She could not hear the words, but she saw the guard straighten, weight redistributing evenly. His gaze shifted toward the entrance, then away. She did not look up. Instead, she finished securing a bandage, checked capillary refill, and gave the patient clear instructions. Her voice never changed. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, an elevator chimed. She felt not fear, not certainty, but alignment, pieces settling into a pattern she had seen before, though never here. The night shift continued. On the surface, nothing had changed, but the nurse slowed her breathing by a fraction and began quietly to prepare. Small irregularities, the first sign was not dramatic, it never was. A patient transfer arrived without the usual advance notice, no pre-alert call, no electronic handoff. The ambulance doors opened, paramedics rolling a stretcher forward with practiced ease, their movements smooth but restrained. Too restrained, she stepped forward before anyone asked her to. The patient was conscious, mid-30s, presenting with abdominal pain, vitals stable, no visible trauma. The report delivered quickly was clean, too clean. She listened without interrupting, eyes on the patient's hands, no tremor, no guarding, fingertips calloused in a way that did not match the stated occupation. She thanked the paramedics and directed the stretcher to a bay closer to imaging than triage should have allowed. No one challenged the decision. The board was busy. The charge nurse trusted her instincts without realizing that was what she was doing. As the paramedics turned to leave, one hesitated just long enough for her to notice. He glanced toward the exit, then back at the bay. She met his eyes briefly, neutral, professional. He nodded once and walked away. She logged the patient and moved on. Minutes later, a supply request came through the system twice. Same order, same timestamp, different terminals, a clerical error most would assume. She cancelled one request manually but noted the terminal numbers. One was near pediatrics, the other was not assigned to any active station. She did not report it. Instead, she adjusted the flow. She redirected a non-urgent patient away from the East Corridor, asked environmental services to delay cleaning one of the side rooms, suggested casually that security reposition one guard closer to the ambulance entrance because it's been busy tonight. No one argued. They rarely did when the suggestion sounded reasonable. A resident complained quietly about bottlenecks. A nurse snapped back. The usual friction, she let it happen. Noise could be useful. At 1:12 a.m., one of the security doors failed to latch properly. The alert chimed once, then stopped. Maintenance would log it in the morning. For now, it stayed closed by gravity alone. She passed it, slowed, and tested it with the back of her hand. It held barely. She placed a crash cart 10 feet closer than protocol required. No one questioned it. Crash carts migrated constantly in the ER. This one simply migrated with intent. A child cried somewhere down the hall. The sound cut off abruptly, not soothed but removed. She noted the silence that followed. She checked the pediatric board. No new arrivals. Her breathing remained steady. A physician asked her to prep a room for an incoming trauma. She did it faster than expected, clearing space, repositioning equipment, aligning lines of movement so no one would trip when urgency arrived. The physician watched her work for a moment, then turned away, reassured without understanding why. The patient from the unannounced transfer requested water. She denied it politely, explaining the need for imaging. He accepted without protest. Too easily. She met his gaze again. His eyes tracked her movement, not her face. He was counting steps, distances. She filed the observation and moved on. The overhead announcement system crackled with a test tone. No announcement followed. She checked the time again, not consciously. It was a habit her body kept even when her mind did not ask for it. Another nurse leaned in beside her. "Feels weird tonight," she said softly. She nodded once. "It does," that was all. At the far end of the department, automatic doors opened to admit a late-arriving patient. She glanced up, dismissed them, then returned her attention to the room. The pattern was not there yet, but it was forming. She adjusted her stance at the triage desk so she could see both main corridors without turning her head. She loosened her shoulders, grounded her feet. Whatever was approaching had not arrived fully, but the hospital had begun to shift around it. And she was already moving with it, quietly, carefully, making space for what came next. The first signal, the ambulance, arrived without lights. That alone would not have mattered, not at this hour, not for a stable patient, but she saw it through the glass before anyone else did, the way it slowed before turning in, the way the driver checked the side mirrors twice as if confirming more than traffic. She was already moving when the doors opened. The stretcher rolled out carrying a man in his late 20s, conscious. Breathing evenly, no visible blood. His clothes were clean but not hospital clean. The paramedic's voice was measured, controlled, delivering the report with professional cadence. Found him collapsed at a transit station, complains of dizziness and nausea, vitals within normal limits. She listened, nodding once, eyes on the patient's face. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the cool night air. His jaw was clenched just slightly, the muscles flexing and releasing in a pattern that spoke of restraint. She asked for his name. He hesitated for half a second before answering. That half-second mattered. She directed the stretcher toward Trauma 2, bypassing an open bay closer to triage. The paramedic opened his mouth to object, then closed it. He followed. Inside the bay, she closed the curtain, not fully, just enough. She began the intake, hands steady, voice even, blood pressure normal, heart rate controlled, pupils equal and reactive. But his breathing was shallow, paced, as if he were keeping it that way on purpose. "Any medications?" she asked. "No," he said quickly, too quickly. She placed the pulse oximeter on his finger. His hand was steady, strong, the kind of strength that came from use, not exercise. A resident entered, already scanning the chart. "Another collapse," she answered before the question fully formed. "He needs labs and imaging." The resident frowned. "For dizziness?" She met his eyes briefly. "Yes." He hesitated, then nodded. Authority moved in subtle ways. Sometimes it wore the shape of certainty, sometimes it wore the shape of calm. As the resident stepped out, she lowered her voice. "Have you eaten today?" The patient shook his head. Water, another shake. Dehydration would have explained some things, not all. She adjusted the monitor leads, ensuring the wires did not cross. It was not necessary, it was habit. The paramedics lingered again at the doorway. She caught the glance they exchanged, quick, unreadable. She nodded to them once, dismissing them without words. They left. She logged the intake, fingers moving fast. The system lagged briefly, then caught up. She did not like the delay. She saved locally and moved on. Outside the bay, security walked past. She watched their reflection in the glass, noting the spacing between them. One walked slightly behind the other, not casual, protective. She stepped out and intercepted them. "Can you keep the east corridor clear?" she asked. "Imaging S about to get busy." One of them started to respond, then stopped when the other nodded. "Yeah, we can do that." She thanked them and returned to the bay. The patient's eyes followed her again. This time he did not look away when she noticed. "You're very calm," he said. She adjusted the IV line. "It's my job." He smiled faintly. It did not reach his eyes. The overhead lights dimmed briefly, night mode cycling. The change shifted the shadows in the bay, altering the patient's face just enough for her to see the tension beneath the composure. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, a door closed with more force than necessary. She stepped back, giving the patient space, and checked the hallway again. Movement had increased, not frantic, directed. At the charge desk, a phone rang and was answered quickly, voice low, too low to hear words, but the tone carried. This was the first clear signal, not danger yet, not chaos. But alignment. She placed the chart at the foot of the bed and marked it with a notation that would flag only one kind of reader. Anyone else would see nothing unusual. Then she washed her hands, slower than required, and prepared for what came next. The arrival, the first raised voice came from the ambulance bay. Not shouting, not yet, just enough volume to cut through the hospital's low, steady hum. She heard it while restocking a supply cart outside Trauma 2. Others did too, heads lifted. A nurse at the charge desk paused mid-sentence. A monitor alarm down the hall chirped once and was silenced too quickly. She did not look toward the sound immediately. She finished aligning the saline bags, checked the seals, then turned slowly so her movement would not draw attention. Two men stood just inside the automatic doors. They were not wearing uniforms. That was the first thing. No EMT jackets, no hospital badges, dark coats, plain shoes, posture controlled but not relaxed. They spoke to security, producing something from an inner pocket. Not flashed, presented, security stiffened. That mattered. The men stepped inside, not rushed, not stopped. She moved back into Trauma 2. The patient had shifted slightly on the bed. His eyes were open now, alert, tracking the doorway. "They're early," he said quietly. She did not ask who. She checked his vitals again, her body angled to block the view from the hall. His heart rate had risen, not dangerously, but enough to register. Not fear, readiness. Footsteps approached, measured, purposeful. The curtain at the bay entrance moved. A man stepped in, mid-40s, clean-shaven, eyes that scanned the room before settling on the patient, then on her. He did not smile. "I'm looking for," he began, then stopped. His gaze lingered on her hands, on the way she stood, on the absence of a badge clipped to her neckline. Hers was tucked into her pocket. He recalibrated. "I'm with a federal task group," he said, lowering his voice. "We need to speak with him." She held his gaze. "He's a patient, so we've been told." Behind him, another man waited just outside the curtain, watching the corridor more than the room. The patient exhaled slowly. "It's fine," he said. "They were coming." She turned to him. "You're not cleared for questioning." The man with the badge raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this is a federal." "I know what it is," she said evenly. The interruption landed harder than volume ever could. The agent studied her again. Not offended, assessing. Outside, the ER continued moving, stretchers passed. A child cried briefly, then quieted. Life pressed on, indifferent to the pressure forming in one small bay. The agent spoke again. We have reason to believe there's a risk to this facility. That word facility was chosen carefully. She nodded once. Then you should speak with administration. We will, he said. But first, she stepped half a pace closer to the bed, not blocking, claiming. He stays, she said, for now. Silence stretched, then from the hallway another sound, shoes stopping abruptly, a different rhythm, more of them. The second agent glanced back, his jaw tightened. This just got complicated, he said. She did not disagree. Her hand rested lightly on the rail of the bed, not protective, anchoring. The patient closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. You should listen to her, he said to the agent. She knows how this ends. That earned him a sharp look, but the agent did not challenge it. Instead, he nodded once. We'll wait, he said, but not long. He stepped back out, pulling the curtain most of the way closed. The bay felt smaller now. She adjusted the IV rate, lowering it slightly. The patient noticed but said nothing. Outside, voices multiplied. Administration had been notified. Protocols were shifting, quietly. This was no longer an isolated incident. It was the start of a confrontation, one that would not announce itself with alarms or gunfire, but with proximity, authority, and time running thin. And she remained exactly where she was. Lines of authority. The ER adapted before anyone announced the change. Doors that were usually propped open eased shut. A security officer took a position near the ambulance bay that was technically redundant. Phones rang, then stopped ringing. Conversations shortened. People spoke closer to one another, voices lowered not by instruction but by instinct. She noticed all of it, she always did. Inside Trauma 2, nothing appeared different. The patient's vitals stabilized under the adjusted drip. His breathing slowed. The bed hummed softly beneath him, indifferent to the pressure building around it. She remained at his side, not hovering, not guarding, present. A hospital administrator arrived first. Late 50s, suit jacket removed, tie loosened. He stopped just outside the curtain, visibly weighing whether to enter. One of the agents intercepted him with a murmured explanation. The administrator's face tightened, then smoothed over. He nodded, straightened his posture, and stepped inside. Is there a problem? He asked, already knowing the answer. The patient didn't respond. She did. There is increased activity in the ER, she said calmly. Unvetted personnel, that affects patient safety. The administrator blinked. He hadn't expected her to speak first. The agent shifted his weight. We're coordinating with security. There's a federal matter. She turned her head slightly, enough to acknowledge him without giving him control of the room. Then coordinate outside the treatment area. The administrator cleared his throat. Let's all take a breath, he said. No one is here to disrupt care. Disruption doesn't require intent, she replied. Only proximity. Silence followed. The administrator glanced between her and the agents. He saw what they were only beginning to notice, that she was not reacting emotionally. She was managing space, flow, and timing. That unsettled him more than defiance would have. We need to understand the risk, he said carefully. The agent stepped forward. There is a credible threat connected to this individual. We believe others may attempt to access him. The word access hung in the air. She adjusted the curtain another inch, narrowing the gap. Then you'll want fewer people near him, she said, not more. The agent frowned. We can provide protection. You can attract attention, she replied. Those are not the same thing. The patient exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh. He stopped himself. The administrator raised a hand. Okay, let's step back. What are you recommending? She met his eyes directly now. Maintain normal ER flow. Limit visible security changes. Keep him here until imaging is complete. If there's a transfer, it happens quietly through staff corridors. The administrator hesitated. That would require my cooperation, she finished for him, which you already have. Another pause. The agent studied her again, more openly this time. You've done this before, he said. She didn't answer. Outside the bay, more footsteps approached, not hurried, controlled, several sets. The second agent leaned in. We've got additional personnel arriving. She shook her head once. Small, final. Stage them off-site, she said. You bring them here, you turn this into a signal. The agent bristled. Ma'am, with respect, she replied. You are reacting. Whoever you're worried about is watching for that. The administrator swallowed. No one challenged her immediately. That was the moment the balance shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to be felt by everyone in the room. Authority was no longer assumed. It was being tested. A nurse passed the bay entrance, glanced inside and slowed. She caught the look and made a small, precise gesture with her fingers. The nurse nodded and moved on. The agent noticed. "So what is it you do here?" he asked. "I work nights," she said, "mostly." He waited for more. She gave him nothing. Minutes passed. The ER settled into a new rhythm, subtle but deliberate. Staff unconsciously adjusted routes. Equipment carts were repositioned. Sightlines changed. None of it was logged. The patient spoke again quietly. "They won't come through the front." The agent turned sharply. "What makes you say that?" He looked at her before answering. "Because she hasn't moved me yet." That earned him a look, not warning, confirmation. The agent exhaled. "If something happens, it won't," she said. "Not like that." A security supervisor appeared at the curtain, eyes wide, clearly unsure who was in charge anymore. "Sir," he said to the administrator. "We've got." She raised a hand slightly. He stopped mid-sentence without realizing why. "There's a delivery entrance 2 floors down," she said. "Unlocked for maintenance. Close it quietly." The supervisor blinked. "How did you now?" she said. He left. The agent stared at her. "You didn't check that with facilities?" "No," she agreed. "I checked it yesterday." The realization landed slowly. This wasn't improvisation. This was preparation. The administrator stepped back, reassessing her entirely. "Who authorized you to make these calls?" She met his gaze steadily. "No one." That should have ended the conversation. Instead, he nodded. "Keep me informed," he said, and left the bay. The agents followed him out, exchanging low voices just beyond the curtain. She remained. The patient shifted again. "You're going to get in trouble for this." "Yes," she said. "You okay with that?" She checked his IV one more time, then the monitor. "Stable." "I don't work here to be comfortable," she replied. Outside, the ER doors slid open and closed. Somewhere, radios crackled softly. A decision was being made above her pay grade and beneath her notice. For now the line held, but pressure had a way of finding weak points, and this was only the midpoint. Pressure points. The first call came from upstairs, not to her. That mattered. She noticed the shift immediately, how the charge nurse's posture stiffened as she answered the phone, how her voice dropped, how she glanced down the corridor toward Trauma 2 before turning her back. When the call ended, the nurse did not resume what she had been doing. She stood still for 3 seconds, then she walked. The patient noticed it too. "They're escalating," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. A transport team appeared at the end of the corridor, not moving yet, just waiting. 2 orderlies, a nurse she didn't recognize, and a wheelchair that had no reason to be there. She stepped out of the bay for the first time in nearly an hour, not abruptly, not defensively. She adjusted her gloves as she walked, eyes scanning reflections in glass panels, movement in polished floors. She stopped short of the group. "What's the destination?" she asked. The unfamiliar nurse hesitated. "Imaging." She tilted her head slightly. "Which suite?" "Radiology." "That's not an answer." The nurse glanced toward the stairwell, toward the direction the phone call had come from. "CT," she said finally. The patient was not scheduled for CT. She nodded once. "Not yet." The orderly shifted his weight. "We were told." "I know who told you," she said. "They're wrong." Silence again. The transport team exchanged looks. This was no one's favorite position, to be caught between instruction and confidence. She softened her voice just enough. "Stand by." They did. She returned to the bay and closed the curtain fully this time. Inside, the light felt harsher, fluorescent, clinical. "They're trying to move you," she said. "They will keep trying." "Yes." She checked the time, then the monitor. Then the hallway through the narrow gap in the curtain. "You can't block it forever," he said. "No," she agreed, "just long enough." Footsteps returned, heavier now, deliberate. The administrator came back, flanked by one of the federal agents and a hospital legal officer. The lawyer stayed just outside the curtain, watching, recording nothing. The administrator spoke first. "We've been advised to transfer the patient." She didn't respond immediately. "What's changed?" she asked. "Threat assessment," the agent said. "New information." She looked at him. "From where?" He didn't answer. "That's not how this works," she said. "You don't move a patient based on invisible data." The lawyer cleared his throat. "There are liability concerns." She nodded. "There always are." The administrator's patience thinned. "We appreciate your vigilance, but this is beyond your scope." That word again, scope. She met his eyes, then put it in writing. He frowned. "That's not necessary." "It is if you want compliance." The agent stepped forward. "We're not asking." She didn't move. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but procedurally. Too many authorities, none aligned. The patient spoke again, his voice steady. "If you move me, they'll follow." The agent turned sharply. Whoever cut your access log," he replied. That landed. The agent's jaw tightened. "You don't know that." The patient smiled faintly. "I know how this works." She watched the exchange without comment. The lawyer finally spoke. "We can secure the route." She shook her head. "You can't secure uncertainty." The administrator sighed. "What do you suggest?" She didn't answer immediately. She stepped to the wall panel and pressed a button, not an alarm, a routine call. Within seconds, the charge nurse appeared. "Lock the west stairwell," she said. "Temporarily maintenance excuse." The nurse hesitated, then nodded and left. The administrator stared. "You can't. It's already done," she said. The agent's voice dropped. "You're overstepping." She looked at him evenly. "You're underestimating." Silence followed. Outside, the transport team dispersed quietly. The wheelchair was rolled away. The administrator rubbed his temples. "If something goes wrong, I'll take responsibility," she said. He looked at her, really looked. "That's not how this system works." She met his gaze. "It is today." Another beat. Then the agent's phone vibrated. He checked it, his expression changing subtly, but enough. He stepped back. "Hold," he said quietly. The lawyer stiffened. "What?" The agent didn't answer her. He looked at the nurse instead. "Who trained you?" She didn't reply. The patient closed his eyes, relief brief and controlled. The administrator exhaled slowly. "We're pausing the transfer," he said. No one argued. The immediate pressure receded, but the cost was clear now. Lines had been crossed. Names would be written down. Questions would follow. She returned to her place at the bedside. Outside, the ER resumed its careful motion. But something fundamental had shifted. She had not just protected a patient, she had challenged the structure, and structures did not forget. The ER had descended into tense quiet, the aftershocks of the initial crisis still vibrating through the halls. Monitors beeped intermittently, a stark reminder that time continued despite the chaos. The nurse moved deliberately, her steps measured, her eyes scanning every face and every corridor intersection. Nothing seemed out of place, but she knew better than to trust appearances. A young intern hesitated at the threshold of a treatment room, clearly unsure whether to enter. Inside, a patient had begun showing alarming vitals, tachycardia spiking unpredictably, breaths coming shallow and fast. Protocol dictated she should wait for a senior doctor. Her instinct, honed through years of covert operations, screamed otherwise. She paused, weighing the consequences. If she acted alone, she risked disciplinary action, perhaps even termination. If she waited, the patient's window for intervention could close. The moral calculation pressed against her chest harder than any threat she had faced outside the hospital walls. Quietly, she slipped past the intern, her gloves crisp and hands steady. Every movement was calm, deliberate, controlled. Inside the room, she assessed the patient with precision, her mind moving through patterns she had memorized in simulations and field exercises long before she had donned a nurse's uniform. She adjusted the oxygen, monitored vitals, and administered an emergency medication. Not a single motion wasted, not a single decision flinched. The patient responded immediately, a subtle but unmistakable stabilization. Outside, the intern watched in silence, or creeping over his features. He had followed rules to the letter, unaware that rules alone could not account for judgment, discretion, and experience. He did not speak, he only observed the quiet authority the nurse wielded without fanfare, without recognition. The rest of the ER remained tense. Staff moved in their usual patterns, unaware of the subtle but critical interventions taking place behind closed doors. She stepped back, documented the actions in the patient's chart with meticulous accuracy, and returned to the hallway. No applause, no acknowledgement, only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the unspoken weight of a choice well made. Later, she encountered a senior resident rushing toward a different crisis. He froze for a moment, recognition in his eyes, though no words were exchanged. He knew what had happened in that room. Her presence alone had altered the outcome, yet no title, no badge, no announcement followed her steps. The authority she exercised was invisible, but undeniably real. By the end of her shift, she reflected briefly in a quiet corner of the ER, observing the flow of staff, the small adjustments each had made in response to the day's events. Her moral choice had not just saved a patient, it had subtly shifted the rhythm of the hospital. The lesson was clear. Sometimes restraint, judgment, and the willingness to act without fanfare carried more weight than compliance with protocol ever could. She exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar mix of exhaustion and resolve settle in her chest. Outside, the city continued oblivious to the quiet heroism within its walls. Inside, the ER had survived another day. She had acted, and it had been enough. That was all the recognition she needed. The night had grown heavy in the ER, shadows lengthening across the polished floors. A faint clatter echoed from the supply corridor, a misstep or something more. Instinct prickled along the nurse's spine, the same tension she had felt during countless operations, long before she had worn a hospital uniform. Every sense sharpened. A sudden alarm from the security panel caught her attention. A visitor had accessed a restricted area near the pediatric wing. Staff nearby exchanged worried glances, unsure if it was a routine breach or something more sinister. Protocol dictated she stay put, alert the authorities, and maintain order. Her mind, however, worked differently. She had trained for scenarios where hesitation could cost lives. She moved silently, hands unclenching only when necessary, eyes scanning for patterns in the chaos. A shadow shifted at the corridor's far end, a figure unfamiliar, hesitating near a supply closet. Without alerting the staff, she positioned herself strategically between the figure and the nearest patient area. Calm, controlled, unseen. Her movements were deliberate but precise. She did not raise a voice, she did not draw attention. Instead, she relied on positioning, timing, and observation, the same skills that had guided her in far more dangerous environments. The intruder froze, sensing authority, though unable to identify its source. A subtle command, a nod, a shift in posture altered the intruder's options. The figure made a single, careful step back, hands raised slightly, uncertainty radiating in every motion. The nurse allowed them to retreat, ensuring the path remained clear, every patient shielded from potential harm. The crisis had been contained without force, without spectacle, through presence, anticipation, and tactical awareness. Staff finally noticed her movement, but they only saw a nurse guiding the intruder away, calm and authoritative. They assumed protocol had been followed, unaware of the silent calculations that had dictated every step. The ER remained orderly, the threat neutralized, and no one outside the room fully grasped the subtle mastery that had preserved safety. Later, federal agents arrived, requested by the hospital's security team after reviewing internal logs. They moved with quiet precision, scanning corridors, observing staff interactions, and quietly confirming that the nurse had already stabilized the situation. They exchanged brief, loaded glances with her, silent acknowledgement of the skill, authority, and tactical competence they had hoped to find. No words were necessary. Recognition had been delivered externally without fanfare, and it confirmed what she had always known. Preparedness and calm authority mattered more than titles or applause. As the agents departed, the nurse returned to her station. The ER had returned to its rhythmic pulse, monitors beeping steadily, staff moving with measured steps, patients resting undisturbed. Nothing had been damaged, nothing had been dramatized, yet the weight of her actions remained. She had made decisions, anticipated threats, and protected lives in ways invisible to everyone but those trained to recognize them. Alone for a brief moment, she allowed herself to exhale. The subtle confirmation from the agents lingered, a quiet nod to her expertise. But she did not linger in it. The hospital demanded vigilance, and there would always be another test, another moment where judgment mattered more than recognition. By the end of the night, the ER had survived, calm and orderly, untouched by the chaos that had threatened its peace. She observed the corridors once more, noting minor inconsistencies, subtle shadows, and every detail that could hint at future risks. Preparedness was never finished, and authority, when exercised quietly, carried the most weight. She returned to her desk, updating logs, documenting patient care, and quietly noting the intruder's path. No one outside would fully understand the nuance of her actions, but that was precisely how she preferred it. The final confrontation had passed, resolved not with spectacle but with competence, discretion, and measured restraint. Morning arrived over the hospital with a soft, pale light, spilling across the corridors in muted shades of gray and blue. The ER had returned to its usual rhythm, monitors beeping steadily, cleaning staff moving in quiet repetition, and patients' families whispering in hushed tones. No one could see the night's events in full, only traces left behind in careful arrangements and subtle adjustments. The nurse walked the floors, checking each station, each patient, each monitor. Her presence was unassuming but commanding, every step deliberate, every glance attentive. She adjusted a chair here, repositioned a patient slightly there, all small actions that spoke of control without fanfare. The staff moved around her naturally, unaware that their orderly environment had been maintained through calculated vigilance. The intruder from the previous night had left no trace, yet her eyes caught the faintest hint of disruption: a scuff on the floor near the supply corridor, a slightly ajar drawer in the pharmacy. Nothing catastrophic, nothing alarming, but enough for her trained mind to catalogue, analyze, and anticipate. Every anomaly mattered, every detail could shape the next potential crisis. A junior nurse approached, hesitant, and asked about the events that had triggered the security alert. She smiled faintly, a quiet gesture, and replied simply, "Everything is under control." No elaboration, no dramatization. Authority had been exercised, recognition was unnecessary. The junior nurse left reassured, carrying forward the calm that had been maintained. The federal agents returned briefly to follow up on internal reports, but they did not summon her. They did not need to. Their brief nods of acknowledgement, the subtle way they had observed her during the crisis, was sufficient. They knew the ER's stability rested in part on her expertise, her quiet command, and the invisible influence she had exerted over the situation. It was a validation unspoken yet absolute. Throughout the morning, routine unfolded as usual, yet the nurse's attention never wavered. She noticed subtle hesitations in staff movement, minor adjustments in timing, and whispered exchanges. Each was harmless individually, but together they formed a pattern, a reflection of how influence, subtle and indirect, could shift the flow of operations. She catalogued each observation, not for recognition, but for preparation. By midday, the ER was calm. The patients were stable, the staff focused, and the hospital had returned to a sense of normalcy that felt unbroken. Yet the nurse remained alert, understanding that calm was temporary, vigilance was ongoing, and authority often worked in silence. She did not linger on accolades or acknowledgement. Her reward was in knowing that her discretion had preserved safety. She paused at a window overlooking the hospital's courtyard. The sunlight reflected in small puddles left from an early morning cleaning, creating fleeting patterns on the stone. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to acknowledge the weight she carried, responsibility that was constant, unseen, and unquestioned. The crises had passed, but the readiness had not. Later, as she returned to her station to complete patient notes, she carefully documented minor observations from the night, including the intruder's path and the subtle movements that could indicate vulnerabilities. Her notes were precise, factual, and unemotional, a private archive never intended for recognition, but for preparation and understanding. The rest of the ER continued its day, unaware of the near disruption it had avoided. The staff went about their duties, the patients remained safe, and the hospital maintained its calm order. And within that quiet routine, the nurse stood as both participant and sentinel, her authority unquestioned by those who mattered, unobserved by those who did not. As the afternoon waned, she allowed herself a final scan of the corridors, checking doors, shadows, and monitors. Everything was in place, nothing out of alignment. The crisis was over, but the lesson remained clear. Protection, authority, and vigilance were most powerful when exercised quietly, with measured restraint and unwavering attention. She finally returned to her desk, finishing documentation, adjusting supplies, and preparing for the next shift. No applause, no acknowledgement. Just the silent, enduring work of ensuring the ER remained a place of safety, order, and calm, even when the chaos of the previous night could have unraveled it completely. Her presence, quiet yet unshakable, left a subtle imprint on the staff, the patients, and the hospital itself, a reminder that authority, competence, and protection need not be allowed to be absolute. The day continued, steady and unbroken, and she remained vigilant, calm, and quietly resolute, prepared for whatever might come next. The evening settled over the hospital with a soft, dim glow. Fluorescent lights hummed quietly, and the corridors were emptying as shifts ended. Patients were moved to recovery rooms, families escorted out, and the pace slowed from the frantic urgency of earlier hours. The ER, once chaotic, now breathed in measured, predictable rhythms. The nurse walked through the hallways, each step deliberate, each gaze sweeping every corner. She paused briefly at the central nurse's station, checking charts, adjusting supplies, and ensuring monitors were correctly aligned. Her movements were subtle, almost invisible to those passing by, yet each action maintained the balance that had kept the ER safe through crisis. Outside the trauma bays, the cleanup crews worked silently. She observed the slight tilts of carts, the careful positioning of equipment, and even the lingering footprints on the polished floors. Nothing had been missed. Every small detail accounted for. The night's disruption had left no permanent mark, and yet she knew that even small lapses could accumulate over time. A security officer passed by, glancing briefly at her with a nod. No words were exchanged, no acknowledgement needed. They both understood the truth in that gesture. She had acted, observed, and ensured safety without question, without spectacle, without external validation. Authority, she had learned, often carried weight only when unspoken. The hospital lights dimmed further as the night shift took over. Patients slept, monitors beeped steadily, and machines maintained life quietly. She took a moment by the window, looking out over the city lights that reflected off wet streets from earlier rain. The calm outside mirrored the calm within, but she remained alert. Vigilance was unending. The absence of crisis did not permit complacency. Returning to her station, she reviewed the logs from the day. Each minor anomaly, each subtle hesitation by staff, and every procedural adjustment was noted carefully. Her documentation was precise, factual, and unemotional. An archive meant not for recognition, but for preparation. The record of her discretion, her competence, and her subtle control remained private, understood only by herself and the rare few who observed. Later, she walked the final rounds alone. The corridors were silent, the lights casting long shadows, and the air carried a faint chill. Each door was locked, each monitor checked, each access point observed. Her presence was calm, measured, and quietly authoritative. There was no need for acknowledgement. The ER's safety was its own reward. Before leaving, she paused at the supply closet, adjusting items to their precise locations. Every instrument, every tray, every vial was accounted for. These small acts of diligence, invisible to others, were the final threads in the tapestry of order she had maintained. No one would notice. No one needed to. The work was complete. Stepping outside, the night air was cool and still. The city hummed softly around the hospital, indifferent to the unseen battles fought within. She inhaled deeply, carrying with her the quiet weight of responsibility. Protection, vigilance, and authority were not measured in applause, but in the calm that followed a storm. As she walked to her car, the hospital behind her seemed to exhale, a place of stability, order, and quiet assurance. She did not look back. She did not expect recognition. Her role was complete for now, and the ER remained secure under her unseen, uncelebrated guidance. Her steps faded into the night, calm, resolute, and prepared. Authority had been exercised, discretion maintained, and safety preserved. The story ended not with spectacle, but with quiet resolution, a reminder that real power often goes unnoticed, but its effects endure. The lights inside the hospital dimmed further. Monitors continued their steady beeps. The city slept, and somewhere in the corridors, a silent ER nurse remained the invisible shield, her work done, her vigilance unbroken, and her authority absolute in its quiet, enduring form.